Today, we're going to unravel a legal judgment to understand how a case of attempted murder and rape, which seemed totally closed, was almost completely overturned when it went to appeal. Wow, I mean, that's a powerful statement from an appellate court, right? It's a pretty damning critique of a case that had already sent 3 men to prison for life. So let's dig in and find out what exactly led the judges to that dramatic conclusion. All right, so let's set the scene. We're going back to 2007. A trial court in Sargodha, Pakistan, hands down a really harsh verdict in the brutal assaults of a teenage girl, who's identified in the court documents only as MG. So you've got 3 men here, Muhammad Aslam, Irfan, and Tanveer. And look at these sentences. They were all convicted of some incredibly serious charges, including attempted murder and rape. And the sentences were severe. We're talking multiple life sentences, plus an extra 25 years for one of them. So, on the surface, this case looks totally shut, right? A horrific crime happened, a victim got justice, and the bad guys were locked up for what seemed like forever. But, as you can probably guess, this was just the end of Chapter 1. Okay, so all 3 men appeal their convictions to Pakistan's federal Shariat court. And this isn't just some legal rubber stamping. This kicks off a complete, top-to-bottom re-examination of absolutely everything the prosecution presented. And this is a really important point you gotta understand. The higher court isn't doing a whole new trial. They're not hearing new evidence. They're more like detectives looking back at the original case file, checking for legal mistakes, and most importantly, seeing if the prosecution's story actually holds up. And what they found, well, it exposed some major problems. So, where's the first crack in the case? It's a big one. The prosecution, believe it or not, had presented 2 completely different stories about what happened. All right, so to understand this, we need to talk about something called an FIR, or a First Information Report. You can think of it as the very first official story that gets told to the police. It's supposed to be the foundation for the entire investigation. And boom, right here is where the prosecution's case starts to fall apart. The first story, from the victim's dad, describes an attack in a field. But then, over a month later, the victim herself gives a statement with a totally different story. Now, it's an abduction from her home, a whole new suspect gets named, and suddenly we're hearing about robbery and rape for the very first time. You can imagine the appellate court looking at this and just scratching their heads. I mean, why wouldn't the family mention abduction or rape right away? And why wait a whole month to name another guy, Muhammad Aslam? This isn't just a small detail. These are 2 fundamentally different crimes. The doubt is starting to creep in. Big time. So you've got 2 different stories. What do? You look at the hard evidence, right? You'd think that would clear things up. Well, in this case, it just made everything even murkier. Okay, this is huge. The medical report on the rape charge. The doctor examines the victim 4 days after the attack was first reported and finds the injury is healed. That one word, healed, is going to be a major problem for the prosecution. Why? Because the doctor himself testified that it takes a few days for a wound like that to heal. But the victim's new story claimed the rape happened on September 4th. Her exam was on the 9th. The timeline just doesn't work. It's a direct contradiction, and it's a massive blow to the credibility of that rape accusation. And it doesn't stop there. What about the eyewitnesses? Well, they were mentioned in the father's first story, but then they just disappear from the victim's more detailed statement. The court basically threw their testimony out, calling it hearsay, and saying, look, it's pretty much impossible that these guys saw what they said they saw and just did nothing. And the missing evidence just keeps piling up. The victim said she was tied up, but where's the rope? The medical exam showed no rope burns. And while they did find semen, which you'd think would be a smoking gun, the prosecution never did the DNA testing that could have linked it directly to the accused men. So you have the story, but absolutely nothing to back it up. So let's recap. You've got 2 different stories, medical evidence that contradicts the timeline, unreliable witnesses, and a total lack of physical proof. Faced with all of this, the appellate court reached a conclusion that was worlds away from the first trial. And they were really clear about this. They weren't saying nothing happened. They fully believed the victim was brutally attacked and horribly injured. What they were saying was that the story the prosecution told, the narrative that led to those life sentences, was so full of holes they just could not support it. So what does this all mean for the defendants? Well, the final verdict is pretty shocking. Muhammad Aslam, the guy who was only named a month late, he's acquitted of everything, free to go. And for the other two, Irfan and Tanveer, their life sentences for rape, completely thrown out. But they didn't walk away completely free. Remember, the court agreed the attack was real. The injuries were real. So their convictions for attempted murder were upheld. The big change, though, was the sentence. It was drastically reduced to the time they had already spent in prison.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole thing. It all comes down to a fundamental legal principle. You just can't build a conviction, especially one with a life sentence, on a single person's testimony when it's inconsistent and has zero evidence to back it up. The prosecution has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and here they just couldn't.
This case leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? It highlights this incredible challenge for the justice system. When you have a story that's so compelling, so horrific, but the evidence just isn't there to support it, what do? It really makes you think, when testimony is all you have, what's the real standard for truth?